I still think many media outlets and publications don't know how to bridge that gap between covering arts and culture in a way that feels editorial and journalistic and respectful, but also using the language that's very common right now on social media, which is immediate, which is, very video-based, which feels very like right now. Sometimes arts and culture, especially for publications, also about archiving what's happening. A lot of art and culture is looking back over the past 50 years and reading about these artists that, right now maybe just starting their own exhibition. In 20 years, they might be selling important works at Christie's. But having that archive, having that record of where they began, or the archival of how a city right now or a country is changing from an arts and culture perspective, is vitally important. Because if you're a publication, if you're not recording that now, in 20 years' time, you're going to be lacking because people are going to not look at you as a publication that really had your finger on the pulse then. So we should be, from that perspective, writing and reporting on and creating content about that.
Maan Jalal, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here.
So for those of you who might not be familiar with you, although they probably know your byline,
maybe,
even if they don't know your face, you are a journalist who focuses on arts in the Middle East, yes?
Yes, arts and culture in the Middle East mostly, yeah. That's been mostly the trajectory of my career since I've been in the UAE.
And you have The Culturist, which is a newsletter that you started recently.
Yep.
And that comes out twice a week?
Twice a week, yep, and Tuesdays and Thursdays.
And how's that doing?
It's good, yeah. I launched it about a month ago, and I cover all the stories that interest me about arts and culture in the Middle East as well as around the world. I have one story that comes out once a week that just lists all the arts and culture stories that are happening around the world. So not just Middle East, not just Europe or the West, it's just the whole world. It's good, it's fun.
Nice. So let me ask you this. It's a nice way to start. When you talk about art, Arab, Western-focused sort of art concepts, explain to me what you see in 2025 as the big, and this might be impossible to do, but I'm going to ask, the big difference between Arab art or Middle Eastern art and Western art.
I think, first of all, it's important to question that question, because that question gets asked a lot. And I think, if there is a real answer for that, it's probably not always useful to define what Arab art or even to define what Western art is. Because not just in art, but outside of art as well in culture, those two elements, those two areas, those two geographic locations are always sort of compared and pinned against each other. And I think it's sometimes not that useful. But, and I can see why that comparison is often made. It's part of our culture of, speaking about the world.
Sure.
However, in saying that at the same time, what I can say about both of these areas is that they both have really old disciplines of craft making, of art making. They're very different. The West probably has a better tradition of archiving their history of art and art making compared to our region. But they're just completely different. They come from completely different sources, trajectories. However, today in 2025, there's definitely some really, there's some synergy and themes that are comparable to both. And I think it's something that's global. For example, there's a lot of artists that are grappling with ideas of identity, reconciling the past with today, understanding where we fit in the world, where we're very aware of the world. There are also themes of really trying to understand AI. That's coming out a lot in the art world, digital art. So these are overarching, I think, themes that both of the industries or the disciplines are figuring out. It's safe to say that the Middle East is especially in the GCC, it's a really exciting time. It's a time where you're seeing a lot of growth from an infrastructure perspective for arts and culture. It's a really exciting time if you're an Arab artist or Middle Eastern artist living abroad or living in the GCC. And I think that type of how I would describe palpable excitement for artists and for entities that are happening here and initiatives I don't think there's any place in the world that has that kind of energy that there is right
So
here.
you bring up, and when I started the conversation, I asked about Arab Middle East. Is there a difference between what would be Arab art and Middle Eastern art? Or because we can sometimes fall into this trap where we're using words interchangeably, and when maybe that isn't the case.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to depends on what your definition is of the Middle East, right? Now people are using, this term of the global South, meaning like, other countries like India and Pakistan and Asia. And to me, probably the difference, if we had to be technical about it, between Arab and Middle East is that Arab maybe does not include Iran and Turkey, but the Middle East would. And again, back to what I was saying, the thing is that I feel like those terms can be interchangeable because a lot of the themes that a lot of the artists from that Middle East region, whether they're Arab or Middle Eastern or from Turkey or Iran or even Pakistan or India, they're dealing with a lot of the same issues. Like our region and our greater region has gone through similar, geopolitical issues, same social structures. So a lot of the artwork that is coming out is not similar, not at all, but it's dealing with sometimes similar themes. I think sometimes the more interesting question is the comparison between Arab artists who grew up in the Arab world and Arab artists who have lived in the diaspora, right, whether in Canada or the US or Australia, whether they're, like me, who left the Middle East when they were 12 and lived abroad and then came back, or they've been there for 2 generations. I think that is sometimes more interesting to think about what is quote unquote an Arab artist.
And is it because they would have been outside the Arab world for a little bit, or is it because they're maybe a step or two away and then they have a different perspective?
Again, it also depends on where in the West they grew up and what their Arabness means to them, right? For some of them, they are very much attached to their identity or the region that they originally come from, and they've managed in their communities to really hold on to a specific type of Arab identity that maybe does not translate or exist in the Arab world today. Well, some of them think of the Arab world as something their grandparents was from, and they have like very romantic or ideal notions of what it is, and they're trying to explore that and understand that, and they're coming back here to really try and tap into that part of themselves. So I think that's always really, really interesting as well.
For me, I've been out here a little bit, and I see the Middle East, and correct me if you see things differently, I see the Middle East is divided into 3 clearly separate geographical regions, culturally as well, I think, and maybe artistically. So I would say North Africa is one. I would say that the Levant is a second, and then the GCC, I think, is a third. When it comes to the art that is produced in those, what I'll say 3 regions, do you see similarities amongst the artists, or do you see that the art that's produced in those different areas are in fact different and distinct?
I think they were probably different and more distinct, during modern art. So like, from in the early 1900s, where maybe travel wasn't as common as it is now. Maybe we were not as connected as we were now. So you'd see a lot of artists creating or being influenced by work that's particularly from their region, combined with more European influences. I think today that is still the case in some ways, but I think that the global influence or the regional influence on art is so big that sometimes you'll see an artwork or you'll meet an artist and you'll be like, oh, I wonder what this artwork is influenced by, or where this artist is from. And then when you read their bio or they tell you, you're like, oh, okay, you're from Algeria. Oh, you're from Lebanon. I think maybe before it was maybe easier to define those on these 3 categories, but now I think a lot of artists, and when I say artists, I just don't mean painters or sculptors. I mean multimedia artists. I mean designers. I mean fashion designers.
Sure.
You could be Lebanese that's very influenced by Yemeni textiles. You could be from Iraq, but you've always been really interested in North Africa and in Egypt. So I think now there's so much more conversations happening within the Middle East between these different regions, these 3 different regions, like you say, as well as a strong focus, I think, which is really exciting, particularly in the GCC, of artists who are living here and looking at the environment here and working from what's happening, particularly in the region and the history of this region.
So you bring up the GCC, which is what I want to focus on mostly in our conversation today. you look at the GCC and the artists that are producing work in this part of the world, and tell me some of the, well, you had mentioned some of the different mediums, right? Painting and sculpting and whatnot. What are some of the more popular emerging trends right now when it comes to what medium is doing incredibly well?
That's hard to answer because I think there isn't a particular medium that's doing particularly well, but I think there's definitely a movement right now that is really prevalent here of Arab artists really taking ownership and of what it means to be an Arab artist and to produce work across mediums and to not only experiment across mediums, but also to, again, I keep using this phrase, to like reclaim or figure out who they are within the GCC or within the broader spectrum. And something, this is a bit anecdotal, but something that really excited me because I used to visit a lot. I lived in New Zealand. I was visiting a lot to visit my father here. But 15 years ago, something shifted. I came for a visit and I sensed that things have changed. Like there were a lot of people moving back here, a lot of creatives, artists across the spectrum, as well as writers and journalists that were coming here because something was shifting. You know, the UAE and the GCC was becoming a place where Arabs from across the region in the Middle East, as well as across the world who have Arab origins, were coming here because this felt like a place that was a platform to have the freedom to create work and to experiment work without feeling like you had to create a certain type of work. You know, you weren't being looked at as the only Arab artist in your community, and so create work about what it means to be an Arab. No, here you could do that if you chose, but you could also you could create work that's not encumbered by your Arab identity. You could create work about materiality, about process, about form, about space, and so including the infrastructure that was growing at the time. So to me, if anything, it's more, to answer your question in a more direct way, only time will tell, right? There's just so much experimentation happening right now when it comes to styles, when it comes to themes, when it comes to mediums, that it's exciting to see what are artists doing. You know, for my time as a journalist here, people always say, and I'm sure you've heard this when you've gone back home, is that, what's happening with arts and culture in the UAE? What is there really? To me, is that there's not enough time for me to explain to you, and there wasn't enough time to write all about it because there was so much happening.
Right. So do you think that Dubai is kind of like the epicenter of the GCC at this point? Or
I think the UAE.
UAE. Abu Dhabi and Dubai.
Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Saudi's doing like really amazing things as well. So yeah, I think the UAE started this.
Do you think that, you know, right now with things kicking off again in Gaza, do you think that artists, Arab artists, artists in general who are in this part of the world are inspired by what's happening there, as well as, do you think that they're at all frustrated, second part of that question, by being here and maybe having to be limited by what it is that they're able to talk about? You know, that idea of self-censorship.
I think generally there's frustration everywhere around the world about this topic and feeling a sense of helplessness, right? I don't know if artists are feeling like they can't talk about what they want to talk about, especially if you're looking at it from a very simple humanitarian perspective.
Right.
And I think I also really want to talk about the fact that any artist, Arab or not, shouldn't feel that they have to create work about something that is very immediate and social and political, right? It has to really, if that's where their practice leads them, that's great. But I think artists are doing themselves a disservice if they're just creating work that is, I think it's important to talk about, you know, social and political issues that mean something to them, but that doesn't necessarily translate to we have to create art about it, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I don't think artists feel encumbered
No.
or feel like they can't discuss these topics that are really important to them.
So the fact that they're in the UAE, that shouldn't have, you don't think that has any impact?
No.
So when we talk about, you had mentioned Abu Dhabi as well as Dubai, I think we both have been here long enough that we know that, and this is something I've said for many, many years, one of the greatest challenges that Abu Dhabi entities have is trying to get a Dubai resident to go to Abu Dhabi for anything. I think they would rather get on a plane, fly to Zanzibar than they would go to Abu Dhabi. And yet, I live in Abu Dhabi, and Abu Dhabi has so much amazing options now for people who want to consume art. And I think in Saadiyat, they're only going to be doing more. Give me your thoughts about the differences between the Abu Dhabi approach and the Dubai approach when it comes to creating that ecosystem where artists are feeling appreciated or where they can sort of experiment.
I think both of them are doing an amazing job at trying to make artists feel appreciated and grow an infrastructure and also grow an audience for people to go and experience art. I think the main difference that I've noticed is that Dubai felt like it was sort of like a slow burn over time. When I first moved here, you'd go into a taxi, they wouldn't know what Al Sarkar Avenue is. They wouldn't know Al Quds, like, why do you want to go there, right? And at the time, Al Sarkar Avenue was like 2 avenues, two roads, right? Now it's the Al Quds Fest that happens every January, has thousands of people going. There's the courtyard. The Al Quds is now a creative zone, right? That happened over time, starting with Al Sarkar Avenue, and now there's Al Khayat Avenue over there, and it's something that happened brick by brick over time through the collaboration of many artists and art professionals and curators and artists and people who are just interested in art, right? Which has been really fascinating to see as a growth. And I think from Abu Dhabi's perspective is that it's kind of happened in a similar way, but also from the top down, right? All these institutions that are happening. We have the Louvre Abu Dhabi, which is, if you haven't been to the Louvre Abu Dhabi and you live in the UAE, what are you doing with your life? You need to go. Just from an architectural perspective, what a stunning gem to have in the country to experience, right? And then the curation of their permanent collection there is amazing. So we have the Louvre, we have Saadiyat Island, we have the Abrahamic House, we have the Guggenheim opening, we have so many things happening in Abu Dhabi. Like, it's only good, and we're very lucky here that Abu Dhabi is not that far away from Dubai. You have other countries where you have to travel by train for 3 hours to get to another city, right? So it's really only a matter of time before that. The initial, but Abu Dhabi is so far away, or Dubai is so far away, that's just going to disappear, because there's so many things happening, not only from institutional entities that are happening, but there's so many events happening. Right now, there's the Abu Dhabi Public Art show that's happening across Abu Dhabi, right? We have the Sharjah Biennale. Art Dubai is happening after Ramadan. There are so many different events that are happening and Abu Dhabi Art later in the year, that is a reason for us to visit these cities and to see how they are different, how they are nuanced, and how they're representing and presenting art.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think, when I've been, just a couple of weeks ago, I was at the Louvre, and I've been there a few times. Do you think, though, that, I know in your previous role, less so in my previous company, you would support art an awful lot in what it is you would do. But I don't know that there was necessarily, all right, from a page view point of view on a news organization, I would see that the art stories would not generally gain a lot of traction. And I think that it was almost as though something that we should do because it's there and it's important. And we know in our soul that it's important. But we don't necessarily, as residents of the UAE, I don't know that we support art in the country the way we should. Now, when you're at the Louvre, for instance, you can see the tourist buses rolling up, right? So many people who are visiting it from outside the country. But do you think that as residents, we do enough to support all the different art options that happen in this country?
I don't think we do, not at all. And we should be doing more.
And then, the follow-up question, why? Why don't we as people do that more here?
I'll tell you why. And I think this is not just a UAE thing. It's maybe a bit more prevalent here. But look, we live in a world, I hate to start any answer with that sentence, where we are looking for instant gratification, right? We're so used to just scrolling and looking at things that give us instant gratification or instant news. And from the back end of that, right, I think a lot of publications and media companies are looking for those instant hits or looking for that instant engagement, which works if you're dealing with breaking news, if you're dealing with business, right? Arts and culture is a slow burn. It's not always about getting you can get the hits and the engagement straight away. But sometimes arts and culture, especially for publications, also about archiving what's happening. a lot of art and culture is looking back over the past 50 years and reading about these artists that, right now maybe just starting their own exhibition. In 20 years, they might be selling, important works at Christie's. But having that archive, having that record of where they began and where they, the trajectory of their career, or the archival of how a city right now or a country is changing from an arts and culture perspective, is vitally important. Because if you're a publication, if you're not recording that now, in 20 years' time, you're going to be lacking, because people are going to not look at you as a publication that really had your finger on the pulse then, right? So we should be, from that perspective, writing and reporting on and creating content about that. The second part of that question, answer to your question, is I still think many media outlets and publications don't know how to bridge that gap between covering arts and culture in a way that feels editorial and journalistic and respectful, but also using the language that's very common right now on social media, which is immediate, which is very video-based, which feels very like right now. And it's not an easy task, but it is doable, right? It's finding a way to use that language to engage young people and to also make art accessible. It's such a fun, challenging task, but it's entertaining and it's fun. And I wish more publications would take that bull by the horn and be like, I want to be a leader in this voice. Like, that's something that I have always tried to do in my career as a journalist. When I first moved here, I was always pushing all the publications I worked from. But look, from when I started till now, it's changed a lot, right? When I first started, I was begging editors for me to write about this artist or this exhibition, and that's changed a lot, which I'm really glad about. But we still have like a long way to go.
So you had mentioned, in Abu Dhabi, it's more of a top-down approach. And in Dubai, it almost feels like it's been a groundswell of the people, right? Where areas within this city in Dubai, Al Quoz you mentioned is a great example. That just that wasn't anything that the government was initiating. But I want to ask, do you think the Dubai government, I don't want to criticize, but I want to have an honest conversation. Do you think Dubai government is doing enough?
Yes.
To support?
Yes, I think the governments are doing a lot. I think it's two things. I think that there isn't enough push from a lot of media, and I can understand why, to focus more on arts and culture in a way that's really deep dive into it. And I also think that there isn't being done enough to encourage people to go and see these exhibitions, from every perspective, from an educational perspective, from word of mouth perspective. We need to also develop the audiences in so many different ways and encourage them to go to these places, to go to these exhibitions and to these fairs and to these institutions. So I always say it's not one person's fault.
Sure.
It's a real it's a cohesive effort, and it's something that doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's something that can take years. It can be generational, like to develop the audience, develop the taste, develop these entities. Sure, in the UAE and in the GCC region, things are sped up, which is great. But I always say there's so much happening here, and that there's not enough people writing about it.
Right. So you talk about developing audiences, which I think is true for a lot of, we as journalists are storytellers, and we want to tell the stories that we believe in, that we're most passionate about. Do you think, and I know you're not a teacher, you're not an education expert, well, you might consider yourself a teacher, but do you think that school curriculums do enough to encourage kids to get interested in art? And the reason I say that is because where I come from, traditionally, the programs in schools that are not going to teach children how to generate an income, those are usually the ones that are cut first. The music and the art sort of things. And I think that's a global initiative that happens around the world. But do you think that we could be developing audiences who are interested in arts at a much younger age if schools took it more seriously and made it a part of the curriculum?
Yes, I think that's really important. And there are initiatives that are happening here. The Louvre Abu Dhabi have been working with lots of schools across the UAE, Arabic-speaking schools and English-speaking schools, on their education and trying to merge aspects of the curriculum with what's happening at the Louvre and Art. And I think that's a really amazing, important initiative. From another perspective as well, I think it's really important. For example, I knew that there are, for the Emirates Literature Festival, which is, not arts in that way, but it's also a part of culture, and they also have intersections of art. They're very connected with schools, and they're always bringing, students to different sessions and into the festival.
Right.
Can there be more done? Sure, but also at the same time, there is a lot of opportunity here from a government perspective for up and coming artists. And a lot of galleries are starting to speak with and be in touch with universities here. I've done a few talks at universities here. American University of Dubai, for example, is one. And the amount of enthusiasm and excitement for students about what's happening here is, beyond compare. And one of the things that I'm always encouraging them, and their lecturers are encouraging them, is there is some onus on the students as well, or the parents of students, if you're in high school or younger, is to take your children to these places. And to get them, this is something I was always telling students at universities. Are you on social media? Okay, that's wonderful that you're following, whatever, Kendrick Lamar, Ariana Grande, I don't know who the cool kids are. But are you also following Esarkal Avenue? Are you also following artists? Are you also following the Louvre of Abu Dhabi? I think that encouraging students, but also supporting art galleries and institutions in Dubai culture and Abu Dhabi culture, not only by showing up physically, but also showing up online for them, following and engaging and commenting and sharing, and tagging, that I think is really important in a way to like I was saying before, finding the language of young people and connecting with them on that level.
You bring up a lot of interesting points there, but specifically the one that I'm interested in right now is this idea of artists within the UAE. And I'm not looking for you to name names, but I wonder are there mediums or are there themes that are being discussed right now in 2025 that are quite trendy, that are happening, and maybe you're seeing some of those in some of the exhibitions, some of the museums are carrying maybe certain collections that are kind of a nice representation of where we are in the UAE in 2025?
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing that I've seen, because I interview a lot of emerging artists and a lot of more renowned artists, and I think the most exciting thing I've seen among emerging artists, particularly who are based here, is that they are looking at the history of whether it's their family or the history of the region, and they're finding these beautiful gems, these things that we don't know about, right? Archival elements, for example, if it can be something like the materiality in the desert. What is the sand made of? What are rocks made of? Right? Or it could be, I don't know, my grandfather was a singer on a pearl diving ship back in the early 1900s, and then taking those stories, those important historical stories, and then reframing them or reimagining them in a way that speaks to their particular medium or their particular voice as an artist, that creates something really new. And you as a viewer, you're walking into this gallery and like, this is really interesting. What is this about? And then when you read the context, you're like, I didn't know that this was happening in the UAE 30, 40 years ago. I didn't know that that this person's father was this thing. And it's telling the story of the region in a way that is new and interesting, while still celebrating heritage and culture, but in a way that is very unique and individual to that artist, and in a way that's creating art that you are not seeing anywhere else, right? That's influenced a little bit from a random European artist, from somebody from Brazil, including some Arab artists. Like, this kind of amalgamation of all of these different influences is really exciting, and the root of it is these young, interesting artists looking back at their own history, their own family, and thinking, where did we come from? What is interesting here? What is the crafts or heritage that I have here that I didn't know about, or that I grew up with? So that, to me, is so exciting.
And I'm not an art expert by any means, but when you look back over history of the last 200 or 300 years, is that different? That idea where the artist is looking inwards for either inspiration or how they can show the world what it is that they're thinking about right now or what they want to capture. That idea of making it so personal, is that traditional art?
I think that artists are always influenced by something, right? Whether it's other artists, whether it's nature, whether it's their own experiences. So it's very personal to each artist, and I think, in a way, I sometimes wonder. I'm always a bit dubious when artists are like, "I want to show this to the world." I'm always like, "Oh, what does that really mean?" To me, art that comes from a place of exploration and maybe curiosity. Whether it's about the curiosity of the self, the curiosity of the material, the curiosity of the world around them, or seeing things that's happening, socially or globally, and figuring out and creating a language from that, and then that, whatever that is, that they end up creating speaks to people from different walks of life from around the world. That, to me, is more interesting, and I think that is, artists always have something to say, and sometimes it's not something to say to someone else, it's something to say to themselves and to figure out themselves,
Right.
and that they're using the environment, the tools, the influences around them to let that thing come out and be a thing. And then, and if it's a good thing, meaning it will touch people, right? You'll walk into a space or walk into a room and you'll be like, oh, what is this? I don't understand it, but I'm very engrossed by it. I'm very mesmerized by it. And, different people are interested in different kinds of art. So
Sure.
I don't think that there's a wrong or right way, but I'm always more interested in artists traditionally who are just curious by nature, and they want to figure things out,
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And since we're in the UAE, I'll ask this. Are there enough Emiratis who are working in trying to express themselves?
Yes, there are, and there are so many more that I'm seeing.
Right.
And so many of them are doing such interesting things, and that they're gaining global attention. They're having their work being shown around the world. There's global brands that are looking here and looking at local and Emirati artists. There's so much, and what's so interesting is that they're so nuanced and diverse. If you ask me what is Emirati art, I'd be like, I don't really know, because all of these artists are doing such different things.
Right.
And I think that, again, it goes back to the beginning, the first questions we were discussing, which is Arab and Middle Eastern art, right? The only way you can define that is that, they're sort of connected to or from that region. But as a movement, you can't really define that, because all these artists are coming from such varied and different backgrounds. Even within, even if you are from Lebanon or from Iraq or from the UAE, they all are so diverse in their family background and, where their grandparents come from. So their art that they're creating is just going to be different.
And do you find that they're using art? This is more of a metaphysical sort of question, but are they using art to help break down certain stereotypes, either about Arabs or Muslims or Emiratis?
I think some artists are doing that. I'm sure that that's a tool for them, but I don't think that that is the main goal for many artists. I think, like I said before, I think artists cannot create because they can't help but create, right? They're just doing things because they need an outlet to create something. And the same thing goes for all creatives. If you're a writer, if you're a fashion designer, you are not doing it, in the more commerce-led disciplines, you need to, pay your bills. But I think if you break it down to the essence, artists and creatives create because they have to create. It's not about, I'm creating art because I want to dispel, stereotypes. Their art might lead them to that because that's an interest of them. But when you start interest for them, but when the initial part of it is they create art because they have to create art. They can't help it. And if you talk to any artist, any creative, you'll see this is something that was from childhood. They were the child that was interested in drawing more than their sibling. They were probably more interested in, creating things, than playing sport or than, whatever it is. They were always more interested in creating. That's something that interested them and they felt more drawn to than anything else.
Right. So when you talk about, traditionally what has happened is with art collectors, they'll say that what you need to do is you need to have a good eye, buy stuff that you're interested in, and then hope for the best during that person's career. And then maybe after 10 or 20 years, you have a piece of art that's, worth an awful lot. Are there a lot of GCC-based collectors of art? And are they supporting, when I say collectors of art, they're also collectors of other collegiate-focused art?
I don't know if I can answer that accurately because I know art collectors, but I don't know like how they're collecting in that way. I know there's a lot of interest in collecting Arab art right now from around the world as well. I think we cannot underestimate the amount of people who are interested in Arab art who don't live in the GCC, who don't live in the Middle East. There's a lot of focus on Arab art right now from a collecting perspective. There was a really important auction. Sotheby's had an auction in Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago that was, really important.
Why? Tell me, sorry to interrupt. Why was it so important?
It was the first auction of Arab art in Saudi that happened, right? And it just shows the growth of interest of collectors of these auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's having a space here and representing and creating a platform to represent some of these Arab artists, So that's really important. It shows that there is an interest and that there is a growth of collectors and a language around which Arab artists can, or a path in which Arab artists can see themselves, especially emerging Arab artists, can see where their art can eventually exist in, right? Not just in their studio, not just in the gallery space, but with a collector abroad. But I want to say something as well about collecting art. I think that is one of the most vital ways that if you live in the GCC, if you live in the Middle East, a way to support the infrastructure, the growing infrastructure of art. And I think people have this idea of collecting art is that you must be somebody who is, have so much money and it's like this hobby that you do. No, collecting art, and I wrote an article where you can start collecting art with a budget of 10,000 dirhams a year, which is
not much.
Not much. And, I talk about going to galleries, going on social media, connecting with gallerists, collecting the drawings of emerging artists. You don't have to buy a big, huge painting. You can buy smaller paintings. It's also about educating yourself in that learning about this artist, speaking to gallerists about, this artist just started here, like what's their next exhibition, seeing how much work they create, understanding a little bit more about the art industry as well here. It's an exciting area, and it's something that's very possible and doable for the average person. Like, I think one thing I've always tried to do in my career is to break that wall people feel when they're like, art gallery, like I'm too scared to go in, it's very intimidating, I'm not going to understand this art.
Or boring.
Or boring. Like, it's none of these things. It's an art gallery should be a place that's open for everyone to go into and experience art. And even if you walk into an art gallery, it doesn't mean you have to buy something. You could talk and discuss art with gallerists and curators and artists for years before you decide to buy something. That's completely okay. But I think there's always a path, and it's a really important path to start collecting. You can buy one small artwork a year, and that's still helping the infrastructure of artists here.
Yeah, and I think that there are so many, when we travel around the world, as we do, we're fortunate enough to live here, and so we get a chance to travel a fair bit. And you see so many small little, postcard size oil paintings or drawings, sketches. And I think that those add a little bit of flair to any wall because they're unique, they're different. And I think that opportunity, I think it's great advice. I think if you're going to invest in something like that, because not just because it could pay off one day, that shouldn't be the motivation.
Exactly.
But it's maybe it reminds you of a trip that you took. But I do think that it is a great way for people in general to support. And if you were to give any advice to somebody in Dubai about what they could do to support, aside from that, purchasing, where would you think are the best places to go? Is it Al Quoz, walking around in some of those areas?
Listen, the simplest way, the most easiest way that's not going to, it's not going to be any effort for you to support the art world is go on social media and follow galleries and follow the institutions, follow Dubai Culture, follow Abu Dhabi Culture, and just follow them and see what they're doing. Follow media outlets that write and talk about art, That is the first step, and it's the easiest step. We all follow meme accounts. Sure. I'm sure we can follow a bunch of galleries, right? So that's the first thing you can do because that helps the infrastructure. It also educates you. It's going to be on your news feed. You're going to see what events are coming up. So that's the first thing you can do. Where to go? There's there isn't one place to go. There's everywhere to go, right? You have Al Sakal Avenue, you have Al Khayat Avenue, you have the Courtyard, which is great. You have DIFC, which has one of my favorite galleries, Tabari Art Space, that really focuses on emerging Arab artists. So you have that. You have Sharjah. You have Sharjah Art Foundation. You have Abu Dhabi. You have the Louvre. Like, there are so many places to go, and each of them have their own style, their own language, their own interests that are so different from each other. And then aside from that, you have the events, right? You have Abu Dhabi Art coming out. We just had Sikka earlier in the year, right? You have the Sharjah Biennale. You have Abu Dhabi Art. There's so much happening all the time, and it's about how do you know about it? So, like I said, follow the social media accounts and follow the media outlets that are reporting on this. So it's about how it can fit into your life as well. I know a lot of people are very busy, parents with kids or people who work a lot, but I think it's really important to enrich your life with art, because some of these galleries that are showing artists, you'll never know where these artists will end up, right? And I think it's so exciting to be able to say at some point, like, oh, I saw that exhibition with this artist before anybody knew who he was, or it's really exciting, this really important artist from Egypt had his show here, and I got to see it. It's just great storytelling.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Last question I'll say, and it might be a little unfair, but if you were to predict the next 5 years, say, and that might be too short a period in the art world, and you can go a little bit longer, but what do you see as some of the future trends that are going to be more prevalent with artists who are either from or living in the Gulf?
Trends. I don't know. Look, I think it's only going to get better.
Right.
All over. So whether we're speaking from an infrastructure point of view, whether we're talking about a support perspective, in terms of trends, I mean, the obvious one is, and I kind of roll my eyes because it's just so obvious, this whole AI digital art thing, like what is happening there? It's really interesting. Art Dubai has a really interesting, and they're one of the first that really dedicated a whole section to digital art. And every time I go there, I'm so interested to see what digital artists are doing from abroad, and they're showing their work here, and what artists that are based in the UAE are doing in that space. I think that obviously is, I don't know if it's a trend, but it's something that is interesting to see how artists are creating work on it. But also, just to contradict myself, there's also a real push towards materiality. Like, artists are also really interested of, I'm seeing a trend of artists really wanting to disconnect from digital and just look at material, like look at paint, look at, cement, look at sand, look at rope, and create work that feels tangible and feels real and that you can connect with. I think what's not going to change is Arab artists or Middle Eastern artists, whether they're here or abroad, trying to explore, and I don't want to say the word reconcile, but try to explore, reconcile, understand where we've come from, who we are, our history, what that means in the context of today, what it means in the future. And that's so much stuff to look into. And I think that's always interesting for me when artists are looking at that. But like I said, there's only better things are just coming. I'm always, whenever I go to a new exhibition or a new fair, I never leave disappointed. I'm always like, there's always potential for more, or there's just great stuff happening. So yeah.
Sounds like a perfect place to end it there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Man Jalal.
No
I
worries.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.